Well, hello and welcome. My name is Mark Starbuck, and I'll be your host for the next 30 minutes and indeed the next 12 months. This is the first of a series of fortnightly podcasts that the ICEJ UK Branch will produce. These podcasts will have a mix of news, Israel-related Bible teaching, and interviews with some notable and special people. It is still very much a work in progress, and over the next few sessions, we will be refining the content, giving the podcasts a name, and finding a nice graphic to go with it so you'll be able to recognize it easily. All good stuff. Now, on the program today will be a shortened news segment. Normally we would try to do about 5 minutes of news, an introduction to the ICEJ, which I will do, and then an interview with Dr. Susanna Kokkonen. And then Russell Bowles, a member of our ICEJ UK team, will join us to tell us more about the UK branch's Yom Ha'Shoah event planned for the 7th of April. It's going to be a great program, and we're so glad that you're here to share it with us today. In the news, Israel went to the polls on Tuesday for the third time in 11 months. However, the final results of the March 23 elections will remain unknown for several days to come due to the impact of COVID-19 and the Passover holidays. Israel remains at the top of the worldwide rankings for COVID vaccinations, with 60% of its population having received the first jab. Prime Minister Netanyahu called Israel the vaccination nation. Tensions in the Middle East continue to ramp up, with increased hostilities in Syria by Russia and Turkey, and rising tensions in Iraq and the Yemen caused by the involvement and influence of Iran. The weakness of the current US administration may also be seen by these combatants as an opportunity to assert themselves in these territories. And now for some local news. The ICEJ UK branch is donating a bomb shelter to the Zebulun area east of Haifa. Go to our website at uk.icj.org for more information on how you can partner with us in this life-saving project. And then on the 7th of April, the UK branch will be holding a special Yom Ha'Shoah event. Make sure that you are on our ICEJ UK mailing list to get your invitation. Well, there we are, some news both from Israel and also from the UK.
It is God's design to make Israel a light unto the nations. We at the ICJ are passionate about Israel and about her relationship with the world. This is why we have celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem since 1980. We have now branches in more than 90 countries all over the world, and we connect believers from more than 170 nations with Israel.
ICEJ.org. Now, some of you joining our podcast today may not know a great deal about ICEJ, who we are, and what we do. So let me take a moment just to tell you a little bit of our story. In the mid to late 1970s, there were a number of Christian leaders living in Jerusalem who, as they read Zechariah 14 and verse 16, a wonderful prophetic passage talking about the future millennial kingdom, they felt that this particular text wasn't just a future moment, but also had significance for then and now. And so they began calling Christians around the world to come to Jerusalem and to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, almost as an anticipation of what would happen in the future. The first of these gatherings took place in 1978. Now, in the summer of 1980, the Israeli parliament declared the city of Jerusalem the undivided, eternal capital of the State of Israel. The consequent international protest persuaded 13 nations to close their embassies in Jerusalem. It was a painful and disappointing moment for Israel, and as a nation, they felt very isolated and alone. Later in that same year, during the Christian Feast of Tabernacles, believers gathered from 23 countries, and they sensed Israel's deep hurt over the withdrawal of the foreign embassies and felt the call of the Lord to open a Christian embassy. They called it the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, ICEJ. The ICEJ was formally established on Tuesday, the 30th of September, 1980, and it was established as a way of representing and expressing Christian love and support for Israel from millions of believers around the world. Now, from its very beginning, the ICEJ has had two primary goals. First, to serve as a means of comfort and blessing through which believers in the nations could show their love and support for Israel. In particular, the text of Isaiah 40 and verse 1, "Comfort, yes, comfort my people, says your God," was seen as a mandate for this ministry. Second, to stand as a prophetic voice to this generation, declaring God's covenant commitment to fulfilling his promises made to the fathers of Israel. Promises of regathering and restoration, promises of deliverance and salvation. For more than 4 decades, the staff of the Christian Embassy, both in Jerusalem and worldwide, have worked diligently to fulfill these God-inspired callings. And to date, the work of the embassy has impacted hundreds of thousands of Christians and Jews throughout the world.
Hello, this is Jürgen Böhler here from Jerusalem. And we have noticed here during this current corona crisis that is going all around the world that there is a new hunger and a thirst to come into the presence of God. More and more people are praying and are praying with us here in Jerusalem. And because of that, we have established 2 special channels of prayer where you can join us wherever you are around the world and pray with us here in Jerusalem.
ICEJ.org. Now, in this second segment, introducing the ICEJ, let me talk a little bit about the work of the ICEJ. During the last 40 years, the ICEJ has established a worldwide network of 90 national branches and supporters from 170 nations. This is a growing family of partners and friends of the embassy. These branches represent ICEJ in their local and national contexts and engage with Christians and churches within their local communities. ICEJ was also the first Christian ministry to actively assist Jews in making Aliyah back to their ancient homeland. And to date, more than 150,000 have been brought home with ICEJ assistance. Our team in Israel not only welcomes them to the land, but gives these returning exiles vital assistance in settling and integrating into the land. From its beginnings in 1980, the ICEJ has embarked upon a journey of giving comfort to Israel. This has involved acts of compassion impacting virtually every town, village, and city throughout the nation. ICEJ Aid has assisted young and old, Jew and Arab, with food parcels, bomb shelters, firefighting equipment, life-saving protective clothing, education, and counseling. It has also helped to establish the Haifa Home for Holocaust survivors. The list of ICEJ Aid activities is quite literally too long to mention here. Raising awareness of Israel and its needs has also been a core mandate and part of ICEJ's program, and it has done this through its international prayer initiatives, its partners with Yad Vashem and the Christian Desk, and also representing Christians at the heart of government through the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. The ICEJ has been a consistent and vocal friend of the nation and expresses its love and support for Israel at every opportunity it gets. All through this time, the embassy has faithfully held the annual celebration of the Christian Feast of Tabernacles, a glorious 7 days when the nations of the world come to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast and to bring their praises to God. It is a spectacular event and a glorious anticipation of that which is to come when Messiah reigns. And we would love you to come and to be with us at some time in the future at a feast or at one of these wonderful events. Well, there we are. A few thoughts about the ICEJ, who we are, what we do, and thank you so much for listening.
We were the first Christian ministry to sponsor Jews flying home to Israel to rejoin the Jewish people here in their ancient homeland. 30 years later, tens of thousands of Russian and Ethiopian and Indian and immigrants from all over the world, we've been helping them come home.
ICEJ.org. Well, today I'm going to be joined by a wonderful friend of the ICEJ. She worked for 10 years as the director of Christian Friends of Yad Vashem. She travels the world speaking to Christians and Jews and civic audiences about the Holocaust, genocide, and anti-Semitism and Israel today. The English version of her book, Journey to the Holocaust, Anti-Semitism, The Bible in History, was published last year. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Susanna Kokkonen. Hello, Susanna.
Well, thank you very much for having you. Having me with you this morning.
It's great to have you, and we're thrilled that we have this opportunity just to take a few minutes to talk to you. Now, Susanna, on the 7th of April, the nation of Israel will pause to remember Yom Ha'Shoah. What is this day, and what does it mean to Jews worldwide?
So, first of all, the word Shoah, I think, is important here because we translate it as Holocaust Remembrance Day. So the word Shoah it's a very hard word to translate. And the first time that we find it in the Bible, in our English Bible, is in Job 30, verse 3. And it can be a catastrophe or desolation,
Wow.
a strong wind that destroys everything. So it's used in all those different ways in the Bible. And so the Holocaust is the Greek word for
Yes.
burnt offering, but the Shoah is the biblical word. So this is Yom Ha'Shoah. It is this day when we commemorate this terrible, terrible tragedy. And when we think about it in terms of the calendar, that we have the 27th of January, which is the International Holocaust Memorial Day,
Yes.
which is for the liberation of Auschwitz. This day is different because it relates to the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto.
Wow.
In the Warsaw Ghetto, the Jews were desperate, and it was very hard for them even to get any weapons. But they managed to hold out against the Germans for about a month, which is longer than many nations.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's such a remarkable thing that this destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto, they started it on the eve of Passover, like Germans often did with these anti-Jewish actions. So the day Yom Ha'Shoah, it falls in the Jewish calendar always in the spring, because it will be always a day that comes very soon after the eve of Passover, because it is in remembrance of this uprising.
Wow.
And Yom Ha'Shoah, it's a very solemn day in Israel. You will notice it because there's a siren, everybody stops, everybody stands still. You will hear this very specific kind of music in the radio, and it's just a very, very solemn kind of day in Israel, but also in Jewish communities around the world.
Wow. Susanna, so it's literally remembering a day of disaster, the beginning of the terrible Holocaust. We're talking to Dr. Susanna Kokkonen, author and well-known speaker on the subject of the Holocaust. Now, Susanna, you spent 10 years at Yad Vashem. What would they be doing at Yad Vashem on Yom Ha'Shoah?
So, of course, now this COVID-19 has changed things very much, because when I was there, we invited a lot of guests, important guests from Israel and from abroad. And some people would literally just fly to Israel just to be there for that short time, a couple of days. And there would be, in the evening, there would be a very special commemoration. Everybody would be sitting at the central square, which is called the Warsaw Ghetto Square. And people would be sitting there, and they would hear Holocaust survivor testimonies. They would have the Prime Minister and the President of Israel speaking. It was a very, very special day. And then the day after, in the morning, there would be the siren, and then diplomats, different government organizations, and survivor representatives, and always also the representatives of the ICEJ would be there to lay a wreath.
Wow.
And by the end of that ceremony, you would see how, there were so many flowers around. You couldn't imagine how many. It was just an amazing sight, and I think a very, very meaningful.
Wow. And these
meaningful day.
Flowers could be coming from quite literally all around the world.
Yes, there would be people who would be there to lay a wreath, and they would come from all over the world. Like, just for example, we would usually have the Jerusalem office of the ICEJ there, but sometimes there was somebody from the branches from different countries who would be there, and they would also lay a wreath.
Yeah. Wow. It just sounds the most amazing and moving moment. Susanna, obviously speaking to the Christian community for a moment, how should Christians respond, or churches, to Yom Ha'Shoah? Is this something that we really need to be taking on board? Are we living in a time where anti-Semitism and prejudice is on the rise?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, we have the aspect of remembering. The Bible says that we are to remember, and we are not just to remember, but we are also to teach future generations. So the commandment of remembrance is very important, and it's a biblical commandment. God himself said, remember Amalek.
Yeah.
And this is Amalek. We could say that there have been Amaleks in every generation.
That's right.
But what happened in Nazi Germany is the largest genocide the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
So it's very different even in that sense. But then in terms of our own time, so 76 years have passed since the end of World War II, which means that in some ways we could say that an entire generation has passed, a post-war generation. And most of the witnesses of the Holocaust would have been very young children at the time. So the world is changing because, first of all, there's the question of how do we transfer that memory? How do we memorize something we did not see? Yeah. How do we teach about something we did not see? How do we make it not to be ancient history, but relevant to our world today? And the other aspect is what you mentioned. So we talk about rising anti-Semitism, and for most people, that's just a phrase they use frequently, they hear it frequently. But what we need to understand is that since 1945, there was like a vaccine, and I'm intentionally using this word now at this time. The Holocaust was a vaccine against the worst statements and the worst actions you could take against the Jews, because everybody could see that hatred, anti-Semitism had led to something like the Holocaust. But that vaccine is no longer effective.
Yeah.
And we can clearly see that because if we think about just the past 5-6 years, in European history, we see terrorism, we see murder, we see horrible acts that have been taken against either individual Jews or Jewish community institutions. And we realize that we have come to a time when World War II indeed is so much behind us that it no longer protects us from that hatred.
Yeah.
And therefore, the Christian world has to have a new approach towards this problem. It's not enough just to talk about it. We have been talking about it a lot. Most people perhaps will be able to somehow define what anti-Semitism is, but that's not enough. We need to take concrete steps because the world has become a very dangerous place. And I do want to add one more thing, and that's the social media, that we need to be also very careful, because the reason why hatred today is spreading so quickly is that past generations never had the means we have today to spread hatred.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Susanna, it's been fantastic talking to you. And just as a final mention of your book that you wrote, how can people obtain a copy of that?
Yes, so in order to have a long, a long view or a very wide view on this topic, including the Bible, the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism, my book is going to give a lot of tools. And Amazon.co.uk, you can order it there, and it's very inexpensive and very quick to order it. And I do hope that people will even find my website with my name afterwards and send me a comment if they have a comment or question about the book.
Wonderful. We've been talking to Dr. Susanna Kokkonen, and it's been a pleasure. God bless you. What's the weather like in Finland and in Helsinki?
it's kind of mild right now, and we are kind of under lockdown right now. So, we are kind of in the same situation as the rest of the world at this point.
Well, wonderful. You have an awesome day, and thank you so much for being part of our program today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So in reality, ICEJ Aid, in partnership with the work that we do, has literally saved and protected the lives of thousands of people and all the people who are connected with those lives as well, the parents and the children and the siblings and the community members, all of whom are around each and every life. Tens of thousands of lives have been impacted by ICEJ Aid.
ICEJ.org. Russell Bowles is a valued member of our ICEJ UK team with a special role in coordinating and promoting the work of Yad Vashem here in the UK. He is also involved in the Yom Ha'Shoah event that is coming up on the 7th of April. Hello, Russell, and welcome to our podcast.
Hello, Mark. Thank you for having me this morning.
Fantastic. Now, Russell, with your particular work and your partnership with Yad Vashem, do you feel that anti-Semitism is a growing issue in the UK at this time?
Yes, it does seem to be, unfortunately. When you look at the Jewish news, there are always reports of anti-Semitic incidents in the various communities, London, Manchester, etc. Liverpool. Yeah, it is the sad fact that in our society today, it does seem to be growing. Just not long ago, there was all that problem in the Labour Party about anti-Semitism at the highest levels of our political system.
Yeah. And this wouldn't be unique to the UK. This indeed is probably a worldwide problem, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is, yes.
Yeah.
My daughter lives in France, and a few years ago she used to rent an apartment next door to a synagogue, and there were always police outside during the services. And
so sad.
Very sad, yes.
Now, the ICEJ branch here in the UK is obviously doing various things about this, connecting with Jewish communities, holding events like a night to celebrate Israel. Yes. And we have this event that is coming up on the 7th of April, Yom Ha'Shoah. Can you tell me a little bit about that and the program?
Yes, Yom Ha'Shoah is the day for commemorating the Holocaust in Israel, and it's actually, the full title of it is Yom HaZikaron Ha'Shoah Ve'Ligvura, which is basically a day of remembrance of the Holocaust and of heroism. So it marks those who played a hero's role during the Holocaust as well. So we in ICEJ we've got a program on the 7th where we are going to commemorate the Holocaust. We're going to be lighting some special candles. We've got a reading of a gentleman that entered Bergen-Belsen at the end of the war in the British Army and what he saw. We've got a song to commemorate the Holocaust. I will be talking about 3 ships that were significant during the Holocaust. One was the St. Louis, which sailed from Hamburg to Cuba with over 900 refugees and was turned away. And then America and Canada turned it away, and finally it came back to Europe, and many of those passengers died. Then in 1941, unfortunately, Britain was complicit in a great tragedy where a Romanian ship packed with Jewish refugees bound for Palestine was not allowed into the Mediterranean, and was left with all the passengers, including 80 children, to starve. Britain and Turkey were complicit in that. And then after the war in 1947, Jewish refugees trying to get into what was then still British Mandate Palestine,
That's right.
were traveling on a ship called the Exodus, and when they got to Palestinian waters, the British riddled it with machine gun fire and rammed it.
My.
So very sad tales of these three ships, but very interesting if you're interested in the Holocaust and what happened to the Jewish people.
Yeah.
You really should listen to that.
Yeah, that sounds just amazing, Russell. And I think many of us will have heard about the Exodus, but of course these other ships and other situations like that in the run-in to the Second World War, so many of us know nothing about. So that is the ICEJ UK event. It's going to be held on the 7th of April. And Russell, how can people access or book in to this wonderful or special event?
Well, if you're already on the mailing list of ICEJ and the office has your email address, Joanne will be who's our administrator in the office, will be sending out a link which you can click on. If you're not already on our mailing list, if you email our office at info@icejuk.org, that's info@icejuk.org, Joanne will forward you the link.
Wonderful. I've been talking to Russell Bowles, part of our ICEJ UK team. Russell, it's been a joy to talk to you. Sad that the subject is not joyful, but a very important one. Thank you so much, Russell. God bless you, and may you be used as you speak on that subject on the 7th of April. Thank you, Russell.
Thank you, Mark. God bless. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for being with us for this first podcast and spending the last 30 minutes with us. We've so enjoyed your company. Now, don't forget to join us for the next podcast on the 9th of April. I will be starting a 6-part series entitled An Introduction to Biblical Zionism. I will also be interviewing Dr. David Elms, the ICEJ UK Branch Director. So until then, stay safe and stay blessed. Bye.